It has been a very, very long time since I have gotten genuinely excited and hyped for a game's release. Over the years, with how many games present themselves and look fairly promising and something I would be interested in, most of them have sadly ended in disappointment. Whether it's because the game comes out a hollow husk of what it's supposed to be, or is marred by greedy and shitty business practices, a hole has been put in my soul, sadly, where it comes to this industry sometimes. Don't get me wrong, there are still plenty of fantastic games out there, especially in the indie scene. As for big companies putting out an actual big and quality game, with some exceptions like Sony, it's kind of a thing of the past. But the last game to really get me hyped beyond belief and actually live up to it was, believe it or not, For Honor from Ubisoft. I remember being in college, and the weekend before the game fully launched, they had a beta to play and mess around with it. I don't think I left my room all weekend. For Honor was by no means a perfect game. In fact, it was unbelievably flawed. But that game, man, that fucking game hit every single note for me in terms of a new, fun, and exciting adventure and world to discover. Not only was I more hyped for the game than anything in recent memory, the first month of that game's launch was genuinely the most fun I've had learning a new game in maybe ever? Like, don't get me wrong, Tarkov is certainly up there as well for games that have genuinely had a large impact on myself, but For Honor did it first, a year prior to be exact, and my god did this game envelop me in its world and characters. Every playable hero was so sick looking and dope and had their own unique playstyle. Being who I am and knowing myself, I naturally went straight to the Knight faction and became a Warden main, to the point where for the first, I think it was 10 or 11 reputations of the game, which is basically a prestige mode for anyone that hasn't played it before I touched another character. I thought the Warden's armor was incredible looking, the moveset was interesting, and the voice lines were delivered beautifully. And the number one thing that gravitated me towards this character and the Knights in general, they were faceless characters, meaning, and I mentioned this in the Dark Souls video, I can attach myself to that character more than any other. Now, to be fair, most of the OG characters were faceless, with some exceptions. All the samurai were the same way, and some of the Vikings not as much as others, but it still sufficed. I will speak on balance later, but the art team outdid themselves with For Honor, and the world and its characters. Easily one of the strongest aspects of the game is how it looks. Hands down, some of the best medieval renditions ever made into a video game. The armor, weapons, everything. Executions are grotesque, brutal, and metal as shit. And the sound effects too. All of the materials of armor and weapons clanking, clanging, and clashing with one another. Oh. Honestly, just talking about it makes me want to boot up the game and just look at the designs of the characters in the world. Oh, and the freaking music, dude, my god. In the early stages of this game's life cycle, like Season 1, each faction in the customization menu had their own music tailored to the faction. So Knights, Vikings, and Samurais had their own theme, and each one is an absolute banger. But it wasn't just menu music. The actual in-game fighting music was unbelievable as well. It literally got more hype and exciting as the match went on, and would get more dramatic and increase in volume, creating this visceral level of tension as you and your team fight to take objectives and slaughter everyone that opposes you. And those feelings were only magnified tenfold when it came down to a 1 versus 1 against you and someone else to win the game. Fuck, man, I love this game. Even to this day, I still love it. However, there is one huge, absolutely massive issue with the game that has been prevalent since day one, is never going to be resolved, and the sole reason I left this game after playing it as my main game for over 4 years. The balance of For Honor. I don't think I can actually put it into words how I feel when it comes to the frustrations, disappointments, and all the negative emotions I've ever experienced when it comes to this game and the balance of the heroes. Again, the first month was genuinely magical because no one knew what the hell they were doing and everyone was just pressing buttons and having fun. It was a good old gank fest and I relished every second of it. But after that, when people began to figure out the game and learn what's good and what's bad, it devolved in some of the most toxic and disgusting gameplay experiences I've ever had the displeasure to endure. And I come from a background of playing League of Legends in Season 4, and even that felt like a paradise sometimes compared to For Honor. Holy shit, the game is so unbalanced, and honestly still is. I I won't get into character specifics because we'd be here for like literally hours. Just know that there were some characters in the game in Season 1 that only had 2 viable moves in their entire arsenal of attacks for actually hitting people, and it was that min-max back then. Only exacerbated by the introduction of ranked playlists later down the line for cool cosmetics only attainable in ranked. That's when the walls finally cracked and was made prevalent how bad the balance actually was. Granted, most of us already knew, but it was more for the people in the back who didn't notice or care to notice. And I think that comes down to not a lack of care or polish from the developers, but them not really being ready for the game to take off and do as well as it did. I genuinely think from the bottom of my heart the original developers of the game, who have almost all since moved on from For Honor, had the game's best intention at heart. They just didn't anticipate people to not only grasp the game at such a high level, but want something more out of it as well. Because it's been 6 years now, and every OG hero has been tuned and tweaked and adjusted so many times it's kind of silly at this point. And that's not even mentioning one of my least favorite things they added to the game, the Wulin Faction. Hot take, I genuinely hate this faction existing in the game. The characters are badass as fuck, but my god, they are the antithesis of these issues and so much more with the original cast. Again, this is so subjective, and I cannot stress this enough. I know people love the faction, and that's awesome. But another thing that put me off of the characters were their faces were exposed. They look good, but I think I much prefer the idea of everyone not having a face and something covering it, allowing you to inject yourself into that role and truly make it your own. It's hard to do that if I can see what the hero looks like. As well as the new faces that were introduced in the original game, in the 3 factions. Centurion? That single character alone broke the game. Season 2 was one of the worst states the game had been in. Season 1 was bad, but kind of forgivable, because it was the first time the game existed, and they got feedback and were making adjustments accordingly. But Centurion and Shinobi were menaces in the game when they first came out, because they kind of broke the unwritten rules the game had. There are now characters that behave this way as well, but to a lesser extent. I will never forget my first fight against a Centurion. I actually have it recorded on my phone, so the quality's like really bad. But I remember just getting punched over and over again and having my dinner bell rank so many times. Again, Centurion is a badass character, but horribly unbalanced for a long, long time. And this just dawned on me too. I'm a console player. I played this game on PS4, and therefore it ran at roughly 30 FPS versus the PC version was at 60. For Honor is a different game depending on how you play it. If you're a console player like myself, the game was hard because moves and attacks in the game had timings, 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds, you get the idea. But because the PC version's at 60, you had half as much time to react to whatever's being thrown at you if you played on console. So for the longest time, I always thought the game was just genuinely harder on console. Because some attacks were so fast, they were pretty much unreactable. You had to get a good read on your opponent and basically know where they were coming, whereas the same attack could be thrown on PC and you could pretty much parry it with ease. Console was a different beast, and that's what you've been watching. I debated whether to re-download the game on PC and get footage there, or go back to my roots and play on console. I opted for the latter because that was where I have all my cool armor and customization options, but yeah, what you're watching is console. And I'm going to make a prediction now as I write this. I'm probably going to have really bad footage because I suck, so forgive the rust and unfamiliarity with any new heroes that are in the game. A lot of people consider For Honor a fighting game, and I honestly still disagree with this thought to this day. For Honor is a third-person, arena-roaming action game with a lot of inspiration taken from the fighting game genre. I know there are other actual fighting games in a very similar vein to For Honor, but I never took the game seriously enough to put it in the same genre. As someone who's played much more traditional fighting games for over a decade, at least to me, For Honor doesn't come close. It is its own thing, and I love that about it. But to lump it in games with the Versus series, Tekken, Street Fighter, Killer Instinct, and now DNF Duel, I can't really bring myself to do so. Veterans and the like are perfectly okay to disagree with me here, but that has been my mentality since day one. Again, you're fine to disagree, that's totally cool, but it's hard for me to consider For Honor a fighting game. I just can't really do that for myself. For Honor is a game that sucked me in even before it came out. The world, its atmosphere, everything the developers wanted to create, they actually did. And their execution was stellar on almost all fronts. Again, referencing balance as the straw that broke the camel's back. I stopped playing for a lot of reasons. Tarkov was beginning to consume my very being. They kept adding more heroes that just felt like they didn't belong in the game, and how unhealthy they felt for the game as a whole. And I hit my soft goal of hitting Reputation 100 on my account across a variety of characters now. I know that isn't a lot anymore, as some people have like over Rep 500 on their account, but to me it was a good send-off for the game. Rep 30 on Warden, which was the original cap in Season 1, and 100 across the entire roster. the game is still special. I hope we see a sequel to it with all the knowledge Ubisoft has learned over the 6 years that they have had to support this game, which, can we just acknowledge how awesome that is? I mean, I low-key want them to stop so they can work on a second game, but to get support for that long in 2022, they had to have done something right. Veterans or new players of the game, I'd love to hear your experiences with For Honor and all the good, bad memories you had. It truly is something really special, and I'm never going to forget it. That game is amazing. Despite all my negativity with it, I still absolutely love it, and I really want to see something cool come out of it, potentially a sequel. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this video, and I hope to see you in future ones.